Welcome to the Three Things Podcast. I'm David Iglesias, Director of Wheaton Center for Faith, Politics, and Economics. You may be wondering why this podcast is called Three Things. You were probably taught by your parents, like I was, that it was impolite to talk to people about three things: religion, politics, and money. But what happens if your job is to talk about those three things? Well, join me for the next 25 minutes and let's find out. Joining me today is Greg Adams, who has a long history serving at high levels in both business and government. Mr. Adams graduated with a BS in engineering from Princeton and a master's in science and management from MIT. He worked at IBM for 37 years and served most recently as director in the financial services sector. Previously at IBM, he worked in sales, marketing, operations, re-engineering, and quality and general management. After retiring from IBM, he served as the state of Tennessee's first Chief Operating Officer, or COO. He's been married to Janine for 43 years. They have 3 grown children and 9 grandchildren. And lastly, Greg serves as the chair to my advisory board. So welcome to the Three Things Podcast, Greg.
Hey, thanks, David. Great to be with you.
Let's first start off with a little bit of background. Can you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how you came to faith in Christ?
Well, David, I was raised in a pretty intense works achievement-based. The harder the work, the better you get family. And that applied to sports, to academics, to theater, and then also to religion. But fortunately, in the spring of my senior year in high school, God brought some men into my life that really challenged me to think about salvation as a free gift. And so about a year later, my freshman year in college, I accepted Christ as my Savior when I realized that there was nothing that I could add to what he did on the cross, and there's nothing I could do to take away from it. And then, interesting, a year after that, I met my wife-to-be. So in a 1-year period, God brought into my life the 2 most important relationships, my relationship with him and then my relationship with my wife.
That's a lot of change in 1 year. So I'm sure Princeton, being a flagship university, has lots of majors, and you picked the engineering major, and I believe you were a civil engineer. Can you tell us a little bit about that thought process?
That was real simple. I was actually being recruited to play football at a variety of places and decided to go to Princeton. And my dad said, there's no way that you're going to play professional football. So you're going to major in something that you can get a job when you get out. So Dad was an engineer at Lehigh, and he said, you're going to be an engineer at Princeton. I said, yes, sir.
Wow, that's pretty simple. And I'd forgotten that you were a football player as well. And my father and I had a very similar conversation many years ago. So you graduated Princeton, and then you entered the workforce for a company that a lot of people call Big Blue, or used to call Big Blue. It was the dominant mainframe computer maker in the world. During the almost 4 decades you served at IBM, can you tell us a little bit about the changes you observed?
Well, I'll tell you, we started out when I was first with the company. I mean, we were, David, you look at the companies today that you most admire. And back in the 70s and 80s, IBM was always at the top of the list. I mean, we had 85% market share. We were legendary with customer service, our employee relationships, and then quarter after quarter, we just delivered amazing returns, to Wall Street. And so, but yet being a technology company, what we saw was the move from mainframes to minis, and then to personal computers, and then the explosion of technology in people's hands connected by the internet. So it's been an amazing ride, and tribute to IBM. We're not the force we were back then, but we're still a significant player in the IT world, and a credit to the leadership throughout those 40 years to continue to adapt to what was going on with, customer requirements and with technology.
So looking back now with the hindsight of, with the 2020 of hindsight, were you surprised that tech became the global economic force that it became?
I'm really not, because there was interesting when I first was with the company. So late 70s, early 80s, there was this thing called Moore's Law, and
Yes.
Moore's Law was fascinating to me. It said that the transistors on an integrated circuit will double every 2 years and will cost half as much. And so what that means is that you could more and more computing power could get smaller and smaller and cheaper and cheaper. And I would be amazed every year that we'd do our kickoff meeting and they would go through and announce the new products that we had. And every year just getting more capacity, less cost, et cetera. And then when the internet came out and the idea that we could now connect people around the world, connect to information everywhere. So it really wasn't a surprise to me, David, because I was living it daily and just seeing these things happening. But Moore's Law and the internet, we're driving factors in all of this.
Let me ask you a question about Moore's Law. Is it still in effect?
It is. I mean, there's still.
That's amazing, because I mean that was a long time ago that law was first announced.
I mean, you just look at the compute power that we have in our, on our iPhones, and those used to be mainframe computers that were, kept cool by refrigerators the size of a football field, and we stick it in our pocket.
In fact, somebody remarked years ago that the typical smartphone has more computing power than Apollo 11 astronauts had at their disposal.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's within living memory of a lot of people, including you and I.
So it was a fun, business environment to be in for all those years.
So at what point did you realize that small companies like Apple would affect IBM?
Well, that with Moore's Law and the size of computers getting smaller, the market just kept getting bigger. And the requirement for simplicity for guys like you and I, ease of use, to be able to use these devices. But, with mainframe computers, you had big staffs, programmers, et cetera. And we just couldn't translate that business model down to really a consumer market. So I would say Apple and Microsoft, folks like that, they really forced us to make a decision in the mid 90s as to what we were going to focus on. And it's that point in time that we actually brought in a CEO from the outside, Lou Gerstner, and he helped us figure out the strategy that said IBM was going to be the best in enterprise computing, meaning we're going to focus on business and large business. And the value we're going to bring is we're going to make all this complex hardware, software, and services work for you. And so that became our value proposition. And so we eventually sold the PC business, and we got out of a lot of that consumer-based business.
Interesting. So you decided to focus on a certain sector on the larger computer needs and not the personal computer needs.
Exactly. And we felt that really played to our core strength of, Big Blue, the tradition of, the dark suits, white shirts, et cetera, calling on the CEOs. And so just continuing that and then saying that, hey, if you're a business and you want to make IT work for you, there's no one else that you want to partner with in IBM.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you a question about the culture, which you've touched on based on what the IBM employees wore. What message did it send that for many years you were expected to wear white shirts and dark suits?
There was actually a book called Dress for Success.
I remember that book.
And I remember my first week in the job, and my father was with Bethlehem Steel, a conservative company, and he had got me some conservative suits to wear, but they were like this shirt. They were little checks and little stripes. And my manager, after the third day, came up to me and said, "Hey, Greg, take a look around at everybody in the office." And I looked around at everybody, and all the guys had white shirts on. And he said, "Tell you what, why don't you go shopping this weekend?" So it was in the culture, and it really reflected that, hey, we were serious about, calling on CEOs, customers spending big money with us to really run their whole businesses. And so, that culture then became one of very hierarchical, the pyramid, how you moved up in the company. It was almost the way we dressed. We knew there was a rule book. You did these things, you got to do these things. And so actually it's kind of easy every day. I had a closet full of 7 different dark suits and white shirts and different dark ties, and, not too hard to get dressed every day.
You know, that doesn't sound very different than the Justice Department that I served in 20 years ago, where I remember getting a lot of grief from my chief deputy anytime I wore a shirt that wasn't white or blue. So occasionally I'd wear a pink or yellow shirt, and you would think that I was, that I'd come in wearing beach wear. Um, so I think similar culture there. So what assignment did you enjoy the most at IBM?
There was a stint where I was the vice president of what's called small and medium business for the Americas. So small and medium business were all companies that had 1,000 or less employees, with a real focus on companies that were 50 employees and less. So my responsibility was to run the 5 regions. So we went Canada, 3 in the United States, and Latin America, and then just the hardware, software, and services for all those customers. But within that job, it wasn't just the market and the geography I covered, but we did a lot with business partners and with channels. I had some great teams, and it was a part of the business that I really kind of grew up in. So it was really a fun 5 years. And, like I said before, technology was changing. It was moving so fast that, it was really an enjoyable time. And we were fortunate to have some pretty good results too during that time.
Sure, sounds like it. So at what point did you realize, I've had a great career, but it's time to do something else? Was there any one particular incident that caused you to think it's maybe time to move on?
There's, and you've seen, there's a lot of books that talk about, the second half, finishing strong. And so really after about 30 years in my early 50s, I just started thinking, even though I loved IBM and the things that were going on, but I just started thinking, does God have something else for me? Maybe a not-for-profit, maybe related to a church, et cetera. So my wife and I really just started at that point in time, just praying about, what would God have something, next for us? And so we just started diligently doing that. And then we'll talk about something came up later.
Yes, we will. I got a lot of questions about that. Can you tell us about some of your biggest success and failures in the corporate world?
I tell you, the success that really stands out to me the most and it's really just a privilege that, my last 31 years with IBM, I was a manager, and the last 24, I was an executive. And so what that meant is that I was always, directing, managing, being engaged with people. And so I love the business aspect of that, and, setting goals, strategies, doing that kind of work. But it bled into the personal. It just couldn't help but happen. And that was just special to really be engaged in people's lives with, marriages, kids, other issues. And so I look back on that and say, what a privilege it was to make an impact on people's lives, not just career wise, but in many aspects, personally and spiritually. The failures, it's interesting, the failures, and someone taught this early to me, and I just share this with all the younger folks listening, is just because you're having a tough time in your job, it doesn't mean you necessarily have to leave. And, what could God be teaching you during that? So I look back on, my successes, and I just feel like God taught me so much. I guess the best example is the job that I disliked the most in IBM probably prepared me the best for the job I enjoyed the most, was being the COO for the state of Tennessee.
Oh, that's remarkable. On a similar note, what advice would you give a young person who wants to enter into the corporate world today? What do they need to be on the lookout for?
I would just encourage, someone that feels a potential call there to really engage, to pray about it, to talk to as many business folks about, their experiences. I just think it's an amazing opportunity to learn a lot, not just about the industry that you're in, the company you're in, but a lot of good fundamental skills, planning, selling, financial, et cetera. So I would just, and then the opportunities to be salt and light because of the intense environment that's going on these days for quarterly performance. So I would just challenge any young person to really look hard at it.
So, did you have any tensions in your industry and your faith that you had to manage or juggle over the years?
I tell you, the tension that really stands out to me over the years is just the quarterly pressure, uh, and it continues today. In fact, David, it's more so because of this technology now. We've got, you're tracking everything that you do in your job. There's milestones, there's pipelines, and there's constant reviews of, is your pipeline moving? Where's your project at? And it goes up the chain, and it's almost tied to the earnings per share. It's getting that intense with the technology. So, to me, it's that quarterly performance that I think as a believer, you can really show a difference to some folks as to how you handle it. I had one manager one time that he was so intense that he would say to us, all right, not only do I want your forecast, but I want you to take me through how much money you're going to make if you make your forecast, and then what are you going to buy with that?
Oh my.
And so finally, after about 3/4 of this, I just said, I can't do this anymore. I've just got to. And so I basically put a PowerPoint presentation together that talked about what made me tick and my faith in Christ, my family, etc. The amazing story about all this is 4 years later, he sent me a little a link to listen to a talk that he gave in a Sunday school class where he talked about people that had planted seeds in his life. And he mentioned that story when I had said to him, you need to know what makes me tick. So, but again, I think it's this quarterly pressure, David, is just, it's really intense these days and gives really people an opportunity to say, God, how can you handle this? And it's our faith.
Right. So you're constantly on this escalator of evaluation. Everything is boiled down to a metric that you can put on a PowerPoint. Yeah, that would be tough. And then after that, I mean, that came to a stop, and then you went to government, the state of Tennessee to be exact. How did that come about?
My wife and our family, we moved about 9 different times. And it was wonderful that we felt this was our tent making ministry, like Paul. And so, but we did a stint in Knoxville, Tennessee. And while we were there, I got together with 4 other guys in my Sunday school class, and we just formed an accountability group. And we used to meet, every Thursday morning from 6 to 7:30. And we were struggling guys in our work and our marriages and being dads. And about 26 years later, one of the guys in that group became the governor of Tennessee. And the night he was elected, we had stayed good friends over the years. And I texted him, and he texted back and said, hey, would you consider coming up to work for me? I need you. And so that started the process.
And did serving at IBM get you ready to be the first COO of Tennessee?
I think it obviously helped with, 37 and a half years of just, identifying business problems, coming up with solutions, then, managing them and project managing them. And clearly a big company like IBM, 400,000 employees, multiple brands and divisions. But the big difference here, and the governor hasn't talked a lot about, because there was no one in state government at the time. There was one COO for the state of Florida, but it was a total different. It was title only. It wasn't the kind of things, because we wanted to adopt the model that a company had, which was to say that, hey, this is an individual, the COO, that's responsible for the operations of all the departments, that gets engaged in driving the annual plan, the strategic plan, and to make sure that we make budget. So the big the big change in all this, David, was the fact that, I'd never been in government, and there had never been a COO position in government. So, who do I call? So that was kind of the leap of faith,
right?
That I took in all this. But now, good for Governor Haslam. He when he introduced me, I wasn't in the room. He brought the cabinet in. So he had the 23 commissioners and the other 6 cabinet members, and said, hey, let me tell you about Greg. Let me tell you about his background. And here's the deal. If you guys come to me with any question or comment about the operations of the state, my first question to you is going to be, what does Greg want to do? So he really said, he bought me 2 months to establish my value without these guys going around me,
Right.
and coming to him directly as the governor. So yeah, the big question mark was no government experience.
Yeah, that's really remarkable. And are other states in the U.S. now using the COO concepts similar to what Tennessee used during your time there?
Well, it's interesting that they started hearing about some of the things we were doing. A lot of best practices sharing going on with what's called the National Governors Association or the Republican Governors Association. And then in the spring of 2018, the National Governors Association asked me to come up to DC and work with 5 or 6 of the other COOs in the other states, along with a consulting firm. And they wanted to write about a 50-page white paper on the role of COO, with the fact that the fall of 18, there was going to be 35 new governors. And then they wanted to present that white paper to all the new governors to say, hey, and it was called The Case for a COO. So I really felt like in the 5.5 years of doing the job, we built a reputation to where it was recognized nationally. And they asked us to put together this white paper to give the new governors to say, hey, you may want to think about, this role as something that can really help you run the state.
Remarkable. Do you have any idea how many states now have a COO?
It looks like it's roughly about 23.
Oh my.
Now the state of Illinois does. I've sat down next to him at some meetings, but there's some of them are a little different construct, so they're not the pure model that we've done. But it is encouraging that governors are thinking about, hey, how can we just run the day-to-day operations of the state better?
Right. And what would you say your top accomplishments were in that position?
I think one of the things we did was just think about state government as a services provider. And so, Governor Haslam and then myself, and we came up with this thing called customer-focused government, which said basically that, we're going to deliver to our customers the best customer service at the lowest possible cost. And so what came out of that was then what we call our annual CFG plan. So all 23 departments would put together, their set of operational goals and strategic goals, and then present them to myself. I'd review them, get them to the governor. Once he blessed them, the departments would then take and trickle them down through their whole organization. And then that became the performance plan for the individuals in the department. So then we went to pay for performance, which is unique in government.
Yes.
Based on how you did against your objectives, determined whether you got a 2 to 6%, raise. The other, I think, interesting thing we did is, we thought a lot about the state as an enterprise, a term from IBM, and shared services. So, David, it was interesting. When I got there, it was kind of 23 departments. These are big departments with, in many cases, 5,000 employees. And they kind of ran in their own silos. So we broke that up and said, no, we're going to be state government, this enterprise, and we're going to consolidate about 20 services, such as IT, accounting, et cetera. And so that was the other, big thing we did from an efficiency and a savings point of view. Supporting that was we changed the logo. We had 186 logos across the state. We went to one with a version for all, 23 departments. So now if you follow us on Twitter or Facebook, there's a consistency. We have like 10 million impressions, a month. And probably the last thing we did, David, I thought was pretty significant, was real estate. By the time Governor Haslam was done, we had reduced 1 million square feet of real estate, across our state buildings, just by, having more people work at home, work with customers, et cetera.
So you were doing virtual work at home way before the pandemic then.
In fact, that was one of the strengths of when this hit in Tennessee, since we had all this training in place and all employees were classified as whether they were work in the office, work at home, or mobile. we could quickly go to, and even before that, probably about 20% of the workforce was already mobile. And so they could easily go further, based on what we had done already.
Right. So I've asked you what advice you would give to somebody interested in the corporate world, but what advice would you give a college student today who's interested in government service, in particular state government service?
Similar to what I'd say about the corporate world, but probably more so though with government. And we've just talked about this, and that was the eye opener for me. Was when you say to people, "What is state government or what is federal government?" And you think about, well, they collect our taxes and they do my driver's license. But one of the things when I started going visiting all 23 departments, I realized that we're a services business. And so we actually started cataloging, and we actually, by the time I'd finished, we had 1,000 different services that, our departments provided. A simple one, like, when you buy a gallon worth of gas, how do you know you got a gallon? So we go out and provide that service for the state and make sure that all the gas stations are measuring fairly. So, but we had 1,000 different services, but the ones that are most powerful are the ones that are touching people's lives. I mean, there are 6 or 7 departments: children's services, human services, disabilities. When I would go there for a department review, I never left with a dry eye. I mean, because they would talk about the things that they're doing. So I would just say for people that are thinking about this, it's an amazing opportunity to touch people's lives. And in most cases, it's people that need the help the most.
Yeah, and I think the average citizen might not have a clear understanding of the differences between state, federal, and local government. They kind of mix them all up. And I've served in state government as well. And what struck me was just the amount of interface that the average citizen had with state government was a lot more frequent or profound than with the federal government. Just a few more questions. Obviously, you went to Princeton, so you're a learned man. Went to MIT, so you know how to build things. What books or scripture verses would you recommend to listeners?
Let me change that a little on you, just because it's really more things I've learned from books, and because as I look back on my life, I had some good books and some wise people share some things. So let me call them some personal practices.
You bet.
That might be helpful. And I think the first one, and I talked about it before with Governor Haslam, is I just think individuals need to be in accountability groups. Mm-hmm. Wherever that we've lived, I've made the point to get into one with, like-minded men, from my church. And I just need them to keep asking me hard questions. Why are you doing this? Why are you traveling so much? Why are you, those kind of things. So I would say that's the first thing, David. I just would encourage everyone, to do that. The second one, and it's interesting, when I talk to younger folks, and now the people at Wheaton should know this, but it got some publicity a while ago because of Mike Pence, but it's the Billy Graham rule.
Yes.
And, the idea that, be wise about, eating lunch with someone of the opposite sex. And that was something I read about Billy Graham early in my career. And, it was something I was really thankful that someone shared with me. And again, I was an amazing mentor to a lot of women, and they were not shirked any help or support from me because of that. And, many times you can eat lunch with someone in the IBM cafeteria and you got everybody around. So I would just say that's the other one. Be wise about,
right.
With the opposite sex, both women and, and men. I think the third thing that was helpful for me with my wife is we did a thing where once the kids got old enough where we could leave the house, for about an hour, and it wouldn't come back and be burned down. We would take a walk every day, and we called it walk a talk. And it became almost, for the kids, they go, "Oh, mom and dad are going off strategizing against us." But it was really, really helpful for us as a couple, just to be able to be into each other's lives and just talking, every day. And then the last thing, David, I would just say that, I say to people is, The environment we're in today as believers, I think it's really important that we focus on excellence. Again,
Yes.
not for our own honor, but for our bosses and things to look at us and say, because I think there's going to be times where people are going to say, I'm not sure about him as a manager. He goes to this certain church, and that certain church believes this. And I think we want those managers at the same time to say, well, look, I don't know about all that, but let me tell you, this guy is the most dependable, reliable worker, and we need to give him or her more responsibility. So I just think, excellence as unto the Lord as the last thing. So just kind of 4 things that I gleaned out of books and friends over the years that, were really helpful to me.
Well, that's really helpful, and thank you for sharing that. My wife and I had a similar practice of called couch time. That is about 10 to 15 minutes every afternoon. The kids could not interrupt us, and we'd talk about our day, because we wanted them to see that the priority relationship within the family was the husband and wife, and not the kids. And the kids finally learned to leave us alone and kind of respect that time. um, so, having served in both sectors, can you offer your opinion on what the government's proper role is relative to the business world?
I just think that the government should be an enabler, that its policies and practices should be really to turn loose, the private sector, to do the things that society needs them to be done for them. And the question that I always asked at the state when we would be reviewing all these services, my first question was, why are we doing them? I mean, this was started 30 years ago. We don't even need this today. Why do we need to be doing it? And then the second thing was, okay, we do need to provide this services for the citizen. Should we be doing it? Wouldn't we be better off if, instead of us doing maintenance for all these buildings, there's professional maintenance companies that do it full time. They're Fortune 500 companies. They do it cheaper, better, fast, those kind of things. So David, I just think that, again, government to enable business, to run and to execute. And then, government should always be asking the things that we're doing, should we really be doing? And then, or is there a better way to do them, or can business do them for us?
Thank you. Okay, this is kind of my last soft pitch to you, and then our interview will be over. But is there anything that I should have asked you but did not ask you? Any area you want to discuss?
How about why the heavy engagement with Wheaton?
Okay, well, I should have mentioned that you're a Wheaton dad. But so, yes, why are you involved so much with Wheaton College?
I just wanted to brag about my son, but more my daughter-in-law. But no, it was the early 2000. My son Brian, and he actually played basketball at Wheaton for Coach Harris and Coach Shower, and so I got to know those guys when they recruited him, and just and visited and just fell in love with the place. And then his wife, Emily, it went to school at Wheaton also. And then I actually had a chance to meet some of their professors who are on the board with us and on your team. And so that was so for the last 15, 20 years, I've just been a fan of Wheaton. And wherever we've lived in the country and the world, I've just tried to stay engaged and just really appreciate, the history of the college and what it stands for, and the leaders that are there. And so it's a privilege for me to be a part of this team and work with you, David, and Dr. Reichen and the other members of the board. So
Thanks. And we love having you there, because your perspective, both with Big Blue and with the state of Tennessee, and plus having a direct personal connection with your son and daughter-in-law. I mean, that's, I think you understand the culture better than most people. Greg, just thank you so much for your time. I know you've got other things you can be doing now, but I appreciate it, and blessings to you and your family.
Thanks, David, and everybody stay safe.
Thank you. You too. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to a podcast from the Wheaton Center for Faith, Politics, and Economics. You can find us at wheaton.edu/FPE.